I think the innovation that we're making in privacy enhancing technology helps, but unless we get the story as well as the transparency and control mechanisms in place for the end user, then we're not going to do anything for end user trust, right? So we need to go front on, full on to the user, explain our story in words that they can understand. And I think we could do a much, much better job of that as an industry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Identity Architects, the InfoSum podcast that spotlights the leaders in the media industry shaping the future of data-driven advertising. I'm your host, Ben Cicchetti, and this week I am joined by Paul Farrow, Principal Product Manager at Microsoft Ads. Paul, welcome to Identity Architects.
Thank you very much for having me, Ben. I'm extremely excited.
I'm extremely excited to learn more about Microsoft Ads, learn more about you, but we'll start the way we always do, which is with our quick-fire questions to get to know you a little bit better. Starting with, what is your earliest memory of advertising?
So you have to think a little bit about this one. So the earliest memory I think of having of advertising generally is I don't even know what it was an advertisement for, but it was I think it was for bread, but it was there's one line in it, and hopefully people listening to this will know what I'm talking about. They say, Accrington Stanley, who the hell are they? Or something like that. Do you remember that ad?
I don't remember that. I feel like I need to look it up now.
I follow football, right? And so now every time I see Accrington Stanley on a league, then I think of that advert. But I did want to also call out my earliest memory of me advertising, which was about 15 or 20 years ago now, I guess, when we started Funky Tutors, which was my company at the time. And I started advertising, getting into programmatic advertising, and I was absolutely astounded because I had no idea about advertising at that point and what you could do on the internet. And I was astounded at the things that you could achieve, right? You could reach your customer without spending too much money. So that was super useful to us. And I did want to call it out because it probably led in an indirect or direct way to me being in the industry today.
Oh, that's super interesting. And obviously you did land in our industry, but if you take yourself being back to your younger self, what did you want to be when you were younger? A footballer, maybe. You've mentioned football once already, so I feel like that could have been
no, definitely that I ruled that out very, very young. No, I wanted to be an archaeologist is what I wanted to be for the longest of time. I wanted to find Atlantis.
Wow.
Because I played a game, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, and it was very cool. So I'm not sure I had the proper understanding of what an archaeologist actually did, because Indiana Jones was the frame of reference. But an archaeologist was what I wanted to be. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, unfortunately, that didn't work out. Fortunately for us, it did, because that means you entered the advertising industry. What was your first job in either advertising or marketing?
I was a solutions consultant in Germany for AppNexus at the time. I've kind of stayed with AppNexus, as we'll probably get into through the acquisitions. But I was working with, at the start, actually, it was, we tend to separate the buy and sell side in the industry very often, obviously, for convenience and for understanding. But at that time, AppNexus was a lot smaller, and the focus was very much on whoever came into the business had to understand both how the buy and the sell side worked, right? So that meant from a technological perspective, but also from a customer viewpoint, like how advertisers and publishers want to use the technology, because obviously AppNexus was and kind of still is an end-to-end platform. So that was super useful. As the years went on, I kind of transitioned more into publishers. I tended to focus more on the publisher side of things for whatever reason. We had a stronger footprint of publishers in Europe at the time, which is kind of still the case. And so, solutions engineering, I think that was a really good footing or foundation for working in privacy today, or being a product manager in privacy, which is what I do today. I enjoyed it a lot, actually. But it was very, very challenging because I transitioned industries. I was a scientist before that, and I transitioned to industries. And I remember just going home and my brain would be literally buzzing from all of the information that I was trying to take on. But it was super fun.
Yeah, and that transition from scientist to what you were doing at AppNexus must have been fascinating. What do you think it was that drew you out of the science world and into the advertising industry? And then I guess what keeps you in the advertising industry to this very day?
Yeah, I think there's so much to love about scientific theory specifically, and the pursuit of science, philosophy of science, and reading about the groundbreaking discoveries that folks make. I think what I found challenging about science was the pace that things move. So doing experimental or fundamental research takes a really, really long time in science. So if you're trying to prove something, prove some kind of hypothesis, or trying to build out a medicine or something, so create a new medicine, right? Then typically that can take years, to on the hypothesis side, and on medicines that could be 20 years before you go from the original idea to actually being on the market, for very good reason, right? That was disrupted a little bit by COVID, but for very good reason. Um, and I wanted something that moved a bit faster. And I had friends in the tech industry or business generally, but specifically in, tech industry, which was like a mystery to me at the time. And so I just started putting the call out, or went going on LinkedIn, and figuring out if there was a place for me to fit. And fortunately, at that time, uh, maybe still the case today, but ad tech was very welcoming to folks that had no experience or very limited experience, because they were just looking for kind of inquisitive, problem solving type of people. And so it was a big jump, and yeah, I was very nervous about making that jump, but in the end, it worked out, and the pace and the people were so amazing. I would never leave. That's probably the main reason I stay in advertising today, is just the people.
Yeah, I completely agree. We're such a people-driven industry, and a kind of a desire to move into tech, and then landing in Microsoft, maybe the biggest tech company in the world, is pretty incredible.
Yeah, that was
And
great.
in that role, you might, yeah, you must get to speak to so many different people at different stages of their career. So, what advice would you give to someone who is just starting in their career in media and advertising?
Um, Yeah, it's a difficult one, right? I obviously I would lean back on what I just said in terms of the technical expertise and understanding the kind of foundations, before you try to run too fast, and also understanding the customer. That took me the longest of time, because I started with the technology as a solutions consultant and trying to fix things, but actually the only way that you're going to make real progress in the industry is you really understand what value you're bringing to both sides of the eco, or all sides, but specifically both the buy and sell side of the industry. So I would recommend really understanding what folks are trying to achieve with the technology that you're trying to support or build or augment. Um, but the main thing, honestly, is just, and I think Obama said this famously, and it really resonated with me. But the I think the main thing is just to learn how to get stuff done, right? And to not talk about stuff. I think there's a lot of, when I joined product management, for example, there was a lot, people recommended books, loads of books, and Udemy courses and all these kind of courses on how to think like a product manager. And those things are cool to a certain extent, but I think once you get into the weeds, when you actually become a product manager for a major company like Microsoft, a lot of times you're doing things that wouldn't necessarily fit into the bracket of what a classical product manager does. And it's really just about finding solutions to the problem that is there on the table that someone has to solve, right? And the better and more efficient you become at just solving problems, the more you will progress in your career. I think that's true in every industry, but it's particularly true in advertising.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, Obama did famously kind of talk about, if you're someone who can just get stuff done, then you'll be well respected and incredibly useful, and go far.
Honestly,
I'm super
to linger on that point, that took me the longest time in my career, if I'm being completely honest, to actually fully understand, because I was very good at highlighting problems in scenarios, or like thinking about grandiose, hypotheses. But the actual execution of things took me a real long time to sort of nail down. But it's fantastically important. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm super interested about kind of what motivates people. So, a two-part question.
Mhm.
What keeps you awake at night? So, I guess what's the stress factor? And then what gets you up in the morning? So, what is that motivational factor for you?
Yeah, I think they're kind of the same thing for me, if I'm being honest. The thing that keeps me awake at night, and the thing that gets me up in the morning. I mean, um, obviously, as a privacy product manager, there's regulations keep me up at night, or the interpretations of regulations keep me up at night. But generally, abstracted from that is the pace of change of our industry, and the fact that if you're not always on the front foot, or understanding the way that the different cogs or the different pieces are moving on the board, then you will get left behind. I mean, you see that now. Obviously, we've seen it previously, but you see it more with AI and how AI is literally disrupting every facet of everything that everyone does right now, and that keeps me awake at night, definitely, because I think, am I going to be? I think a lot of people have this thought: am I going to be irrelevant tomorrow? Right? A lot of the skills and the expertise that I've built might be irrelevant. But then that's also the thing that gets me up in the morning, right? And but not out of fear, right? Out of this is the biggest opportunity. This moment is providing some of the biggest opportunities that we've seen ever in, frankly, in thousands of industries simultaneously, but especially working at a company like Microsoft, where AI not only is it affecting our business, but it also is our business, right? So that kind of opportunity is, I mean, to say it's even once in a lifetime is an understatement, right? That is generational. That's once in history that this kind of movement is going to happen, and you want to be a part of it, right? You don't want to be watching from the sidelines. So that definitely keeps me motivated for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we can understate the impact that AI is going to have on so many. It's almost like the introduction of the internet, right? When it's that sort of kind of seismic shift in culture, seismic shift in the professional world, how we communicate with each other, how we work with each other, and how we kind of be more efficient. So I think it is a super interesting time, and particularly from a Microsoft perspective, must be fascinating. We obviously, and you've touched on it, it's an incredibly complex industry. But let's try and simplify it down a little bit. How would you describe what you do within media and advertising to a 10-year-old?
um, to a 10-year-old. Wow, now I should just imagine my son. My son is 9 years old. What do I
Okay.
say to my son? Um, so I think people get confused with what I do, honestly, because I'm a privacy product manager, and compliance and stuff, and privacy sandbox and all these topics we could get into, that is obviously a part of it. But ultimately, what I think that I'm trying to achieve on my mission is to provide value to the advertising ecosystem, right? So to make, but I can't say that to a 10-year-old. So to show to show to show ads that are for things that you will like, without requiring or taking too much information about you. That's probably about as simply as I can put it. So that can range from, just honoring current regulations in the way that they should be translated into technology, but it could also be, or it is also, trying to improve the inherent technologies themselves so that we don't require any information about you, right? So um, the latter part was not for a 10-year-old, but the first sentence was, yeah, I'm trying to get relevant ads in front of you without needing any information from you. That's how I'd put it.
I think that's great. That's perfect. Right. Final of our quickfire questions. Personal favorite of mine, as everyone knows, because it does give me a unique insight into everyone I get to speak to on this podcast.
Mhm.
If there was a song that was a soundtrack to your life, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. Trying to think of something clever here to say, say or insightful. I can only think of the same song that I listen to all the time, which is Groove Armada at the River. And this is, I guess, I'm quite, which is probably coming across already. I'm quite, my mind is quite frenetic. I'm quite all over the place, and it's very important for me to find ways to calm myself down and center myself. And I find that song kind of has come with me. A lot of songs you like for a period of time and then you cast off and you can't listen to it again, and maybe it comes back. But that one is one song that's for some reason had the same effect on me since I first heard it, and it chills me out, reminds me that all of these things that we think matter so much in our day to day don't actually matter that much, and calms me down and brings me back to myself. So yeah, that would be the soundtrack to my life.
I think that's an awesome choice, and we have a playlist on Spotify that I now get to add that to, which makes me super super happy.
Nice.
Okay, we can get a bit deeper before we get into kind of some of the specific trends that are happening in our industry. Maybe you just give us a quick overview of Microsoft ads, because I'm sure everyone listening to this has heard of Microsoft, knows who Microsoft are, but very specifically, kind of the ads element of the business.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because everyone's heard of Microsoft. Not everyone, particularly in the advertising industry, is aware of Microsoft ads. We found that because as I said, I've done the transition through AppNexus, Xander to Microsoft. Kind of aware, I wasn't aware of Microsoft Ads actually as part of AppNexus, but it's absolutely enormous business, right? So it starts. It's very similar in structure to other large international companies. So it starts with search. So Bing is a huge advertising driver or revenue driver for us. It's by far the biggest revenue driver when it comes to advertising. But then we have kind of two additional businesses to that. So we have a kind of audience extension to Bing, where you can collect and run audiences on Microsoft properties, O&O. So that would be, a lot of folks don't know what Microsoft O&O is, right? So LinkedIn, Xbox is O&O, Outlook, MSN, of course. MSN is the largest one. All of them are at different stages. Some of them haven't even implemented ads yet, but and may not in the future. But that is the O&O that we have when we talk about Microsoft. So there's ways of buying into Microsoft, which is obviously another is a huge strategically important business for us. And then there's with the acquisition of Xander, which is now 2 or 3 years old. Then we have Microsoft Monetize and Microsoft Curate, and we will be sunsetting Microsoft Invest, but for now, Microsoft Invest still exists, and that is more of our third-party offerings, where you can use us as a traditional DSP, SSP, but they also plug into our O&O offerings, so you can buy on MSN through Microsoft Monetize, for example. So I think that's the entirety of Microsoft Ads, but it's made more complicated by the different surfaces that we have, because we also have a browser, which makes things more interesting in Microsoft Edge, and I'm probably forgetting other aspects of Microsoft, and that's trying to put all those pieces together. As a privacy product manager for Microsoft, I have to think about all of those pieces simultaneously, and how all of the different users of those pieces are affected by anything that we do or anything that we change.
Yeah, and the POVs of those different users must be so varying, right? From an Xbox gamer to a LinkedIn user, although there is definitely going to be a crossover. You're looking at one of them, heavy LinkedIn user, but also a massive Xbox user.
Yeah.
So there's a huge crossover, but there's also quite a lot of difference in how I expect to appear or be served when I'm playing Xbox versus scrolling LinkedIn and so on and so forth. So I can see that kind of dynamic of that user base must be incredibly complex. And you've mentioned how quick and rapidly the advertising industry is evolving. So I just kind of want to get like a state of play the way you see it right now. How would you describe the current state of the industry, particularly as it relates to identity, measurement, and the way that brands are trying to connect with consumers?
What's funny is I feel like, in comparison to the past 5 years, we're actually in a relative state of calm, and it almost seems crazy to say that, with AI disrupting absolutely everything. So there's kind of two pieces to it. There's the identity privacy framework, where I think, because of changes to your browser ecosystem, or not changes that are coming in, Privacy Sandbox and still exists, but cookie deprecation has been slowed down, right? So the frantic nature of the identity ecosystem has kind of calmed down a little bit, or the identity and privacy. But that's not to say that progress isn't being made. It's just that progress can now be made, in my opinion, more calmly, more thoughtfully, without creating unnecessary disruption. But it does mean, in comparison to the past 5 years, I think we've reached a state of relative calm as it pertains to identity specifically. But on the flip side, we have changes that AI is bringing forwards that will disrupt, or are already disrupting, like the fundamental model of the web, right? And so questions around identity and privacy, or our understanding of the identity and privacy landscape is being challenged, right? As attention is shifting away from classical open web cases, what I just described as search being our biggest business, the search to open web dynamic or direction is changing subtly, not in every case, and it's not cataclysmic, but it's definitely changing away to more agentic experiences. And as that kind of happens, then we have to reassess, what tools have we built that help us approach this problem, and what tools do we need to build in the future to help address us with the pace of change. So I think the only constant is change in our industry, and that will always be true, and that's why I enjoy it so much. But for me personally, I think I'm a lot calmer this year as we approach the AI revolution, or we start to dive into the AI revolution, than I was last year when we really didn't know what was happening with the web at all.
Yeah, it has been a super interesting dynamic to see change, an increase in things like zero-click searches where, more and more information is being surfaced directly rather than kind of indirectly, which is super fascinating, kind of changes the dynamic in how cookies, for example, were used at all. And obviously, one of the things that's driving that change, and one of the things you mentioned kind of slightly keeps you awake at night, is this kind of constantly evolving privacy landscape.
Mhm.
From a Microsoft perspective and what you're trying to focus on, how do you see the balance between innovation in advertising and then consumer trust evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, that's super interesting. And obviously, the answer innovation in advertising is a huge, that's a huge question, and many people are approaching it from different angles, right? I hate to bang on about AI all the time, but AI is providing all of the innovation and change in the industry, right? For example, brand agents and things like this, publisher agents, how are those things going to interact? That isn't necessarily the thing I'm currently focusing most of my time in. I spend the innovation in advertising for me is around privacy preserving technology, and it has been for a long time now. And although that's maybe less sexy than it was a year or so ago, for me it's as sexy as it ever was, and and that's true for Microsoft, and I continue to work on it, and continue to try and innovate in that area. But it's interesting what you talk about when you bring up consumer trust, right? Because that's huge for us. That's like for Microsoft, that's our USP, right? That's something that we really, really value highly. And the thing about privacy preserving technologies is as amazing as they are for end user privacy, which they are, um, as amazing as they are is as how complicated they are to explain to the end user, right? So providing all of the privacy enhancements around k-anonymity, differential privacy, and all these kind of privacy buzzwords that we know well, that doesn't really help for the end user trust, because all they see is an advert that is based on some kind of information that they put onto the internet that has reached them. And so if we don't get the story right, and I think Microsoft broadly, and I'm biased here, I think we do a good job, but I think as an industry we have to collectively do a lot better and get this our story right to the general population that doesn't understand the bits and pieces that we do, and the things that we're trying to improve, right? So that I think that the innovation that we're making in privacy enhancing technology helps, but unless we get the story as well as the transparency and control mechanisms in place for the end user, then we're not going to do anything for end user trust, right? So we need to go front on, full on to the user, explain our story in words that they can understand, and I think we could do a much better job of that as an industry.
Yeah, I agree. It is incredibly important, that kind of consumer communication or that determining of what that story to the consumer is. At InfoSum, we'll always believe that privacy enhancing technology is sexy because that's what we do. So I'm fully aligned with you there. But Microsoft has this really unique vantage point in our industry across search, display, platform
Yeah.
partnerships, personal favorite of mine, as I've already mentioned, gaming.
Yeah.
How does that perspective shape your view of the broader ad tech ecosystem and Microsoft's role in it?
What a question that is. How does that shape my view? It's definitely shaped my view. It's going to be hard for me to articulate exactly how, I guess, but it definitely has shaped my view. I think coming from AppNexus through Xander into Microsoft, I've definitely grown and changed in my perspective. I think as part of AppNexus, I thought the only thing that existed was programmatic. And then, but being part of Microsoft forces you to see everything through the lens of the biggest company in the world, is that essentially, right? That has, as we touched on earlier, all of these different user interactions, which are incredibly important. And the interesting thing about Microsoft in comparison to other large or similar sized companies, shall we say, our ads business is relatively small in comparison to, a a Google or a Meta, where a large part of their revenue is advertising. It's very different for Microsoft, right? So we have to, in the choices we make, and how we roll out different products, we have to be sensitive to the way that affects the rest of the Microsoft business. So, how does that change how I see the industry? I don't know. I think Microsoft places such a heavy emphasis on trust, and I think this is why I was so happy that we were acquired by Microsoft, and why I have been so happy in our role. And I don't get frustrated with any individual company. I just get frustrated with the industry as a whole, because I think we talk we talk a good talk around privacy. I hate this term, by the way, privacy first, because I think it's overused, and people don't mean it when they say
Doesn't
it.
mean anything anymore.
It doesn't, right? But I think we talk a good talk. But I think when it comes to the crunch, as an industry, we're often found lacking. And I think that we should, for the for for the sustainability of what we want to achieve in the future in advertising, I think we need to do a better job. I think whether Microsoft has shaped that, or just my progression through the industry, I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, trust is important.
Yeah, and in particularly for, and it's why a company like Microsoft being so passionate about this is so important, right? Microsoft has that brand equity that is so strong that it can't afford to lose the trust of its consumer base. And it does such incredible work to maintain that trust, as you say,
Mhm.
as Microsoft is kind of this global entity that we've all heard of and we all use on a daily basis.
Right.
We mentioned privacy enhancing technologies, and they are, whether people view them as sexy or not, increasingly at the forefront of the advertising industry. What are some of the developments you see as most promising for helping us balance that personalization with the compliance factor that everyone now has to consider?
Yeah. So for me, this is a relatively simple but probably biased answer. I think the advancements in confidential computing that we're seeing, across cloud companies, but of course specifically Azure, who's a leader in this space. I think, um, the relationships that we're building, with the silicon companies, and the advancements that we're making those chips to enable, more complicated or more processor heavy but cheaper use cases. I mean, it's the classic computing thing where it's getting cheaper and faster, and that enables more things, right? So, as I, I didn't expect myself to bang on about AI this much, but as AI kind of comes in, what I'm really excited about in the confidential computing space is being able to do some of the complex things that happen in GPUs, in server stacks, and so on, in a more confidential, fundamentally confidential way, right? So, announcements that Azure has made in, AI, confidential computing AI, and the progression that they're making there, I think is super promising, because I think, frankly, I think other industries have lent in quicker, to confidential computing for various different reasons, right? Because maybe they don't have the complexity of the programmatic advertising ecosystem in terms of connections. Maybe they don't have the latency requirements that advertising does in real time. But as those, confidential computing units, let's say, get cheaper and faster, then I would hope and expect that it, migrates into our industry on a more fundamental level, so that we can, protect the privacy of consumers. So I'm super excited. I always have one eye on what's going on in Azure. I have good connections with the Azure folks, and I ping them every so often and say, what's going on and what can we use in advertising. So, yeah, that's most exciting for me.
Yeah, that must be fascinating. I feel like I would totally nerd out getting all that information. We've got our CTO, Alistair, incredibly passionate about confidential computing and kind of the role it plays in what we do at InfoSum. So I feel like that would be a fascinating world to kind of dive into.
I feel like
Something
an
we've
idiot, I should say, whenever I do. It's very, very complicated to understand exactly how it works. But yeah, no, I know we've gone on about the Microsoft point quite a lot, but how lucky is it, to be able to go and talk to these? I'm sitting in Bury St Edmunds right now, which is close to Cambridge, so I can just pop to Cambridge, see the Microsoft research folks, and talk to them about a direction. I feel blessed that I'm able to do that. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in taking yourself outside of your bubble as well, right? And we can all get too close to our own bubble,
For
meaning
sure.
advertising just kind of being everything we focus on. There's so much incredible innovation that you can take from other areas and get inspiration from. So having that ability to kind of have those conversations must be incredibly interesting and shape the way you view kind of how things evolve at Microsoft and through the advertising industry in general.
Mhm.
We touched on identity a few times. Identity as it pertains to kind of the cookie-based world. Obviously, Microsoft has a huge wealth of first-party data that's available to them. How do you see, as we move into this privacy, to use the phrase, privacy first world, how do you see identity strategies evolving to adapt to that era?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question, right? And I don't think I'm going to say anything necessarily novel here. I think the value of first party data, deterministic first party data, which I distinguish from, just first party data, has already increased, has been increasing for a long time. I think the value of that, but I think maybe the number of publishers and advertisers that are really embracing that is increasing. Maybe they've known. I think everyone's known for a long time that handling first party data, it has become is increasingly important. But I think it's, you have to prioritize things as a business. You have to balance. You're always balancing the next quarter's revenue with, the how you can innovate and how you can keep yourself relevant. But I do think that continues to be, and it certainly is for Microsoft, right? Protecting your asset, but protecting the user, ensuring that you have good privacy constraints, security constraints, there's no data leakage. All of those things are becoming increasingly important. Cookies or no cookies, I don't think it really matters. Having control of your data and the data of the user, so you can confer that control to the user themselves, which is ultimately the end goal of privacy, but also so that you can derive value from it. I think it's kind of, it's kind of a cliche at this point. We've been saying it for so long, but I don't think that I see across the ecosystem a completely mature utilization of the first party data assets. I think that will continue to be important. So I'm not sure if the identity strategies change necessarily in the next. AI does change things a little bit, but I couldn't give you a coherent prediction as to how it changes things right now. But I think we still have a lot of work to do to utilize the first party data that we have access to, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned something there which I'm super interested to dig into, which is kind of how AI is obviously going to impact a lot of things, how it might impact identity. And obviously, AI is only as good as the data that feeds it. And obviously, that kind of throws up a few privacy challenges. So, what's the biggest opportunity do you think that AI brings to advertising? But how can we advance privacy as well as kind of performance factors when we're kind of utilizing AI?
Yeah, I actually think it's a weird one for me. I don't necessarily. I think there's this intuition that AI explodes the privacy problem. I don't think it actually does do that for a few reasons. Firstly, I think um, definitions of what personal data is and processing personal data and security and data minimization and data retention, all these things, all these concepts apply in very similar way. Obviously, it's more complicated with the kinds of prompts that we're receiving, but the kind of the principles of how data should be handled with AI um, remain kind of the same. They just have to be done at scale, right? And they have to be done in these new interfaces. I think in terms of there's a few ways that that advertising is going to be disrupted by AI and identity, especially. And one is, just the opportunities for advertising are changing, right? So how an advertiser interacts with agents, AI agents, whether that be a co-pilot or another chat experience, or whether that be an agent embedded into some other kind of experience, right? Like you now have the opportunity to have real rich contextual information, not necessarily personal data, right? In the moment, real-time contextual information, kind of like search used to work, but more rich, more granular, more informative. You also have the opportunity as an advertiser to direct that agent to the purchase, as we're already seeing through chat experiences, right? Agents are able to make purchases or direct without even leaving the experience, right? They can make purchases in that experience. So that's definitely a really exciting part for advertisers specifically, or a new way for them to monetize. But it also, as I kind of touched upon earlier, it disrupts publisher. So if you use advertising broadly and not just for the advertisers, it disrupts the publisher monetization model, right? But there's a tension there because as attention gets diverted from some cases, not all, away from publishers, right? Then we agents still need that content, right? So whether that content makes its way to the agent, but the content is still required. So this is not an identity question necessarily, but there's a monetization question that needs to be answered, and it's starting to be answered by the industry. But how do we continue to get that content from publishers to feed the agentic experiences so that users use them, so that advertisers can reach them, right? And so I actually think that in that universe, there's a potential for it to be more inherently privacy preserving and for everyone to win at the same time, right? For the publishers and advertisers to continue to win. Content might change a bit, advertising will change a lot. But there is an opportunity for everyone to win, I think, but it has to be done sensitively and properly. And with this much disruption at this much scale, there's always potential for things to go wrong. So I think, yeah, we have to take care as an industry.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that must be challenging, or I'm assuming is challenging from your role, is, Microsoft is a global company, and we
Right.
are seeing different regions, different countries approaching privacy and regulation in slightly different ways. How does Microsoft Ads navigate that patchwork while still delivering consistent value and consistent experiences to global brands?
Yeah, this is both an extremely complicated question, but also it's an extremely simple one as well. And it's complicated because you're right. I'm not a lawyer, caveat, but the regulatory framework globally is very complicated, right? And it's still evolving, and it will continue to evolve. Even the EU, that's relatively mature, continues to evolve from a regulatory perspective. I mean, we had two new regulations come into effect 1 or 2 years ago, right? Very, very impactful ones. And then the patchwork of the American state laws, and there's slight different interpretations between the state laws, so it's not completely the same in every state. So it is a complicated framework if you decide to look at it that way, but you can strip everything down to fundamental principles, which is something that I talk about a lot publicly, a lot internally. Is that we first of all we have a privacy standard at Microsoft which supersedes kind of anything that happens from a regulatory perspective anyway. And second of all, I think privacy is actually very, very simple, as I touched upon earlier. If you Whenever I roll out a product or I'm involved in the rollout of a product, I try to think about like what the user would expect. What would the user expect with regards to their information? And very often the user does understand the value proposition of the exchange that's happening, right? But they do want things to be transparent. So that's one. And they do want to have control over any information that we may use to provide them services, right? And I think honestly, if you establish transparency for the user and control over their information or information about themselves, if you do that in a way that matches or aligns with user expectations, then there's really nothing more for you to do. Yes. Now that's a very, very simple thing to say, but in practice, it's very complicated across the different products that we have. But I think broadly we do a good job of that.
Yeah, I agree. And look, we started this conversation talking about, the only thing that's constant in our industry is change, and it's constantly evolving and rapidly changing, as we know. Let's try and look ahead, say 5 years. What changes do you expect in how advertisers, media owners, and platforms collaborate in this new privacy era, AI-enabled world?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. I think it it's possible that we'll have less human interaction, perhaps, right? But that sounds bad. It's a sort of a bad start. But we'll have greater closeness and greater understanding between different parties, right? So what I mean by that is the different parts of an advertising. Ultimately, you have publishers or advertisers that want to get in front of users, right? And you have different parts of the chain that supply different things, but different stages of the attention that that user has, right? Attention is a scarce, finite resource, and folks are trying to get users' attention, right? But today we've built up a very complicated ecosystem in terms of infrastructure and the calls that we make and the metadata that we send around. But I think with the advent or the introduction of agentic AI experiences, there's the possibility to reduce a lot of the friction, because now companies can communicate in natural language rather than metadata that's being thrown around in like millisecond time zones, right? So the time frames. So what you get back to, or what you go towards, is a situation where folks are kind of shaking hands, right? A publisher can shake hands with an advertiser and say, hey, look, this is what I can offer you. These are the users that I have. These are the formats that I have. This is the kind of these are the kind of pages that we're publishing. This is the content that we have. And the advertiser can say, great, well, I'm looking for these consumers. Can you help me? But we can do that now a tremendous scale, right, across the whole of the industry. I don't know what that does to the different intermediaries. I don't think they'll completely disappear, but I think that they will have to evolve to enable those kinds of interactions. And referring back to my previous answer, if that's all done correctly, there is potential to do it in a more privacy preserving way. You don't have to drop an identifier necessarily on a user anymore, right? You don't have to make a large database of that user's inferred interests across like multiple companies. That doesn't have to happen anymore, right? You can all talk directly, potentially, about what you're trying to achieve and how you can help each other achieve it. And so 5 years, yeah, I think that might be possible in 5 years. We're certainly starting to see those conversations happen today. So yeah, I'm excited to see what happens in the next 5 years for sure.
I totally agree. And I love that answer because, one of the things that drew me to InfoSum 8 years ago was this idea of collaboration between companies being more important than ever. When I joined InfoSum, almost no one was talking about quote unquote data collaboration. And now everyone is thinking about how they can collaborate with each other to drive those consumer experiences we know work better. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's about individuals like you who are pioneering new ways to use that data safely to deliver those better experiences that we know consumers enjoy and react to. So when you look to people that you admire in the industry, who would you nominate for me to interview on an upcoming episode of Identity Architects?
This is a very hard question, because honestly, there's so many people in the industry that I value speaking to, a couple of whom have already been on the podcast. But I think I would nominate Todd Parsons. Do you know Todd?
I don't.
Todd Parsons is the CPO, I think, is his current title, of Criteo. And I've met him a few times now. And the reason I'm nominating Todd is because every time I speak to him, not necessarily that I learned something new, but it's that I see something at a different angle to the way that I've thought about something previously. I think a lot of people, this is just natural when you're in an industry, or if you're internally, you tend to kind of get aligned in your frame. You might think a little bit different here, a little bit different here, but you're kind of aligned in the way that you structure a problem. And there's been a couple of occasions where I've been speaking to Todd where I've thought, he thinks about it like that, and that's a really cool way of thinking about it. And I like it. I like his outlook. So I think that, and Criteo, a great partner, and so on. And I've loved working with them on privacy sandbox stuff, specifically like trying to break down some of these problems, privacy and preserving technology, where they've published great things. So yeah, I'd recommend speaking to Todd.
I love that. We will definitely reach out. And look, that's one of the things I love about doing this podcast. I get to speak to so many people, different people from different perspectives, who do kind of allow me to step outside my bubbles, step outside my kind of usual train of thought. So I've really appreciated speaking today. You've definitely done that. You've given me a lot to think about. But also, I just think it's fascinating to understand how a company like Microsoft is delivering those experiences while kind of preserving the privacy of consumers. So I really appreciate being on the podcast, and I really appreciate the work you and everyone at Microsoft is doing to drive that mission forward.
Oh, that's super fun. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thanks, Gio, for nominating me. And I wish I could do this the whole day, but I can't, unfortunately. So thanks, Ben.